Stage names and aliases have been a part of the music industry from the beginning. David Bowie named himself after a knife. Sting's nickname came from a stripy black and yellow jumper that he used to wear a lot before the Police got started. And Lady Gaga can allegedly be traced back to an autocorrect mishap that mangled Queen's Radio Gaga. Choosing one's own name is even more important in the vocalsynth world, built as it is upon internet publishing. Producer names can be anything from in-jokes with fans, to puns, to surprisingly literal self-descriptors. They can be so varied that I'm sure that every longtime fan has come across at least one name that left them wondering where on earth that name even came from. With any luck, I'll answer that question for at least a few of you today. Let's try to say the P names. I want to start with a few notes before I get into the list proper. First, I've only included names if I could find a story behind them. There are plenty of Japanese producers whose names have meanings that are lost on non-Japanese listeners, but anybody can look up a translation. It's an interesting bit of trivia that Utsupi, for example, uses the kanji for depression in his name, but I couldn't find any evidence of why he chose to be called Depression P. Second, the P thing. To keep it brief, it's short for producer. It was pretty popular in the early days of Vocaloid fandom for creators to receive P nicknames based off of something in their work or their social media presence, but that's mostly fallen out of fashion now. If you see someone with a P name who only made their debut in the last few years, they've almost certainly picked it out for themselves. Likewise, this episode's title is a reference to the song Try to Say the P Names by Maritu, which is a sort of nonsense song with Hatsune Miku that he released back in 2011. Let's Say the P Names is an alternate translation that frankly works better as a title, but the point here is that the lyrics of the song are pretty much just a rapid-fire list of different producers' names. Ironically, Maritu is an artist whose name I couldn't find a backstory for. He has a P nickname, Goku Aku P, or Super Evil P, but I almost never see that used to identify him. It's always just Maritu. All that being said, let's get to the list. Akano P, or Mathi, kicks us off with a story behind both of his names. Akano is pretty obviously a reference to his first big musical storytelling venture, The Story of Evil, or Akano Monogatari. Mathi, meanwhile, is an acronym for Master of the Heavenly Yard. Explaining the lore behind that, or basically anything Mathi has ever made, would take ages, but suffice to say, the Heavenly Yard is an important element in Mathi's broader Evilius Chronicles universe. It's more or less their afterlife as far as I can tell, and by referring to himself as its master, Mathi acknowledges his role as the creator of the entire Evilius mythos. Cho-Cho-P and Papillon are two names used by the creator whose real name is Ichinose Yu. I'm not totally clear on which name came first, but the one is definitely derived from the other. Cho is the Japanese word for butterfly, while Papillon is the Romanji spelling of the French word for butterfly, papillon, which is spelled with two L's making the y sound instead of a y because, French. Circus P saw his first hit with a song called Circus Monster with Megarine Luca. Before that, he'd used names like Doofus P, and he still uses a side channel called Cheez-Its Are Yummy for covers. Seems pretty self-explanatory, but I'll have to take his word for it. I don't think I've ever had a Cheez-It, I can't eat gluten. Cosmo at Boso P started out just going by Cosmo. He got the second half of his handle after the release of his second song, Hatsune Miku no Boso, or Hatsune Miku's Rampage. He's also used several other aliases, most of them riffing off the same theme. There's Cosmo 8-Bit, Cosmo at Runaway Ultimate, Cosmo at Runaway Alter Ego, Runaway P, and Kuroneko Antique. No idea where that last one came from, but the Boso name remains by far his most recognizable. Speaking of Cosmo, a producer who encouraged him to release his first album was Deadball P, one of the earliest adopters of Vocaloid and Hatsune Miku. He made a name for himself, pun intended, when his sexually explicit lyrics got him into some hot water with Krypton Future Media. I could devote a whole episode to Deadball and the debates that he kicked off about Hatsune Miku's role as a tool of creative expression, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. The relevant point here is that his name came from a comment on one of these very explicit songs. While he might have described his unabashedly sexual lyrics as unpretentious or straightforward, this particular commenter said that such work was instead more like a dead ball than a straight ball. I'm still not entirely sure what that means, whether it's a sports reference or talking about some other kind of balls, or something else altogether. I'm working from browser translations of pages written in Japanese, and even if I weren't, the sources that I found all just offer the comment without much other context or explanation. Regardless, the name stuck, and Deadball P used it for dozens of releases thereafter. Next up, we've got Dekonina. I know that I personally have definitely called him Deco27 on this podcast before, because I read his name in my head for a good decade before I ever heard anybody else say it out loud. But strictly speaking, Nina is the proper pronunciation. Apparently, 2 and 7 are his favorite numbers, and put together they can be pronounced Nina. And you can spot references to this in some of his songs, most notably in Two Breaths Walking when Miku thanks Papa, Mama, and Nina. Deco, meanwhile, is a homophone for the Japanese word for forehead. By his own description, Deco has a pretty large one, though I've seen a few photos of the guy and I wouldn't say that I thought much about his forehead one way or the other. Finally, the asterisk in the middle came from just looking down at his keyboard and thinking it'd look cool. Dixie Flatline has also been called Gemini no Hito, or Gemini Person, because his first song was titled Gemini. In truth, however, he's a Virgo. The name Dixie Flatline, meanwhile, is a reference to a character in the science fiction novel Neuromancer by William F. Gibson. Dixie is a mentor figure to the novel's protagonist, Case, already dead before the start of the narrative, but preserved as an AI construct in the novel's vast virtual reality cyberspace. Neuromancer was hugely influential on the cyberpunk genre, so I'd say it's about as appropriate a namesake as it gets for people making music with digital voices. Doriko had already been using that name online for a while before debuting on the Vocaloid scene. He'd used an illustration of a girl holding a drill as his phone wallpaper, and if you put the Japanese pronunciation of drill with the kanji ko that's often used in feminine Japanese names, you get Doriko. He's also occasionally been called Kiritan-P by fans after his song Kiritan-Po, but again, this was more of a nickname and not really used to identify him. One of my personal favorite producers is Fairy, who spells it like the boats and not like the mythological creatures. She's answered a couple of asks on her Tumblr about where the name came from, and though I'm not sure how seriously these answers should be taken, I did think they were funny, so I'll include them anyway. In one, she said, quote, "My tragic backstory is that I was typing random words into the login field and Fairy was the only one that wasn't taken." On another occasion, someone asked if Fairy was short for Ferold, and she said no, it's short for ferocious, obviously. Though I don't know the stories behind all of the contributors' names, the music collective made up of Jamie P., Vane Lily, and Rice Deity, which is called Flavor Foley, got off to an explosive start last year with their song Butcher Vanity. As they themselves put it in the video description, they were a, quote, delicious new music circle, serving up delectable ditties guaranteed to satisfy your cravings. And also, satisfy your cravings. You know? It's a song about eating people. Yeah. As for the other half of the name, Foley is the term for creating sound effects for movies and television, named for the work of pioneering sound artist Jack Foley. So, Flavor Foley, with their tasty sound, named themselves, well, Tasty Sound. Furukawa P., the songwriter behind the gorgeous Miku piano ballad Alice, named himself after a parking lot. Apparently, there was one near where he lived called Furukawa Parking, and he said in an interview that his thought process was pretty much, well, it's better than whatever, P. I mean, he's not wrong. Ghost and Pals started off as Ghosty P, and then went by Mars Mitzi for about 2 years before returning to Ghost. I couldn't find a source to cite for this one since a lot of their old social media has been scrubbed, but I do personally remember them saying once on their now deleted Tumblr that the name Ghost reflected their long-standing issues with dissociation and depersonalization. As for the Pals, they've made some delightfully ominous jokes in the past warning people not to ask who the Pals are. Or else. Final warning. But to tempt the wrath of the Pals and speculate a bit, I think that their inclusion in the name serves two purposes. On the purely functional side, Ghost is a pretty common word, and there's already another fairly well-known artist by that name. The Swedish metal band Ghost formed in 2006 and released their first album in 2010, which was well before young Ghosty P uploaded their first original song in 2013. On the creative side, my best guess is that "and Pals" is a nod to the various voice banks and characters that populate their music, and, possibly, to the rather close relationship that they had with their fans at the time of adopting the name. Again, though, this is mostly just me speculating, so take this bit with a grain of salt. Hideki Magnetite picked his name because he wanted it to sound like the name of a company or an institution, using the formula of a family name plus an industry. He gave examples of things like Suzuki Foods, Takahashi Glass, and so on, and said that Hideki Magnetite sounds like a company that produces magnetite. As for why he picked that name and that product specifically, he said that he'd, quote, leave that to your imagination. The name Iowa came from rearranging the hiragana in the word yoai, or weak. Apparently, the poor guy has such a weak stomach that he made a music career about it. Jimmy Thumpy's first song, back in 2008, had a very simple thumbnail image and video. As such, he started calling himself by the phrase Jimina Samune, which translates to plain or bland thumbnail. He's also gone by One Room, but I'm not sure where that one comes from. Gene, creator of the sprawling Kagero Project franchise, has a name that could be just about anything. It's common enough that it might just be his real given name, but he spells it in hiragana, so you can't really read any particular meaning into it. That said, he's also got a P name from his fans, Shinzen no Tekipi. It translates to Enemy of Nature, which I'm pretty sure is a riff on one of his first hits, Jinzo Enemy or Artificial Enemy with Hatsune Miku. Kairiki Bear, like a lot of vocalsynth creators, is a gamer. A Kairiki Bear, or Mighty Bear, is an enemy from Earthbound, which is also known as Mother 2 in Japan. These bears look friendly, but they can take and deal a lot of damage, so they seem to me like a very appropriate namesake for a guy who pairs aggressive music with cute illustrations. Koyori's name doesn't seem to have any particular meaning behind it, but he's also known as Denpolpi, and there's quite a story there. His song titled Me with Hatsune Miku features an image of an electrical pole for the video, and electricity is denki in Japanese. There's already a layer of pun there with the English word pole, but on top of that, some viewers decided that the image, with a lot of wonky wires, resembles the character Jean-Pierre Polnareff from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Hence, Denpolpi is a shortened form of Electrical Pole Polnareff. I honestly don't really get it, but my vast knowledge of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure begins and ends at nothing, so you could tell me just about anything was a JoJo reference and I just have to take your word for it. Kurage P got his name from his first song, Kurage, or Jellyfish. Simple enough. These days he mostly goes by Wada Takeaki instead, which I think might be his real name, but it's not totally clear. But his older songs in particular will still often be credited to Kurage P. Mikitopi is similarly straightforward. His early songs mostly use the voice bank SFA2 Miki, and to is the Japanese particle that translates to and or with. So, Mikitopi is literally the producer with Miki. Michiyam kinda surprised me. He started out as Michiel Michi before shortening it, and both the former and current versions of the name are a reference to another musician, Mitch Mitchell. To call Mitchell a talented drummer would be an understatement. Rolling Stone magazine ranked him as the 8th best drummer of all time in a 2016 list. And he was probably best known as a drummer for Jimi Hendrix. It's a big jump to get from that sort of classic rock to the bubbly electronic pop music that Michie M makes, hence my surprise. But regardless of genre, I feel like anybody who understands anything about music would have to admire Mitchell's raw skill and all the amazing music that he contributed to. And interestingly, Mitch was a stage name for him too. He was born John Graham Mitchell and got the nickname Mitch from people riffing off of his surname, like Styles Stilinski in Teen Wolf. Nayutalien, or Nayutan Seijin, has come up with a whole elaborate backstory about being an alien from the planet Nayutan, who came to Earth after discovering an intergalactic Nico video feed. He also calls his music a, quote, invasion plan, and has released a whole trilogy of albums titled The Thing from Planet Nayutan, X, Y, and Z, which are full of space-themed songs. The guy has a bit, and he knows how to stick to it. Neru shares a name with the Japanese verb to sleep, and his Twitter handle is still, in Roman characters, @NeruSleep. He also earned himself a P name with his very first song. His author's comment on Kazuoto no Chronicle was, I used Kagamine Rin and Len while I was sleeping in the closet. Thus, fans dubbed him Oshire P, or Closet P. Orange Star, or Mikanse P, speaks pretty solid English, having lived in Utah and California for a few years each. With that skill, he picked a name that engages in some cross-language wordplay. One way to use kanji to get the sound mikanse translates to incomplete or imperfect, an appropriate match for the sense of melancholy that's in a lot of his music. Meanwhile, the kanji for mandarin or orange plus the kanji for star will also get you mikanse. Generally, those referring to him as Orange Star will spell it with the English alphabet, even if they're speaking Japanese, while mikanse P will generally be in kanji. I searched far and wide for the story behind Oster Project's name, but I came up dry. For all I know, she just really likes Oster brand kitchenware. However, when she got started back in 2008, she used to go by Futanari P, or Hermaphrodite P. Setting aside the baggage that's attached to the term Futanari, you may have noticed that there aren't a whole lot of women on this list. Even though feminine voice banks like Hatsune Miku and Gumi are by and large way more popular than masculine voice banks, the majority of those actually writing the songs are men, especially in Japanese circles. Futanari P was apparently meant to convey a gender-neutral impression to avoid judgment, until she revealed her gender in 2010 and fully committed to the Oster Project name. She also uses variations of Fua Fua Cinnamon or Fluffy Cinnamon for a lot of her social media and non-Vocaloid stuff. And that seems to simply come from the fact that she really, really likes cinnamon rolls. A lot of Owata P songs are deliberately bizarre or meant to be jokes, like his iconic parody Chlorobenzene. But it all started with his song Turkish March Owata, which includes a cow emoji in the title that I obviously cannot pronounce out loud. It's a slangy way to say, it's over, or the end, very dramatically, and since the song was the one that got him noticed online, the name stuck. Pinocchio P is another producer whose name started with his very first song. Hanauta is the Japanese word for humming, but if you translate it more literally, you get nose song. Thus, a producer named after a boy most famous for his nose. Our sound design is just one guy, but if the name sounds more like a band or a record label to you, you're on the right track. Apparently, he picked the name for exactly that reason, to sound like a collective. Also, this isn't really relevant, but I found out while researching that this guy is also a doctor on top of being a successful musician. I mean, I know a lot of Vocaloid producers do have day jobs, but medicine isn't really a field that usually allows for a side hustle, so hats off to a hard worker. As I mentioned in my episode dedicated to him, Sasakure UK grew up in Fukuoka, where the dry winter winds would chap his hands and leave him with hangnails, a condition known in Japanese as sasakure. Meanwhile, the UK part of his name is a combination of underground and his real name's first letter, nothing to do with the country. Seinamoto's name used the kanji for vertebra and name, but he was one of those producers who seemed to be referred to more or less equally by his chosen handle and a P name. He was known for his alternative rock sound, which often featured a very distinctive, resounding snare drum. Hence, the onomatopoeic name Powa Powa P. As a side note, right around when I started writing this episode, his song Young Girl A with Kagamine Rin, which is a prime example of his explosive percussion sound, surpassed Chinozo's Goodbye Declaration to become the #1 most viewed Vocaloid song on YouTube. Wish he was still around to see it. Teniwoha's name consists entirely of particles, the short Japanese function words that do things like denote the subject of a sentence or act as a conjunction. He picked the name because he liked the sound and found it, quote, mysterious, and because he didn't think that anybody else had a name like that on the vocalsynth scene already, which, to be fair, they didn't. Wotaku might be the simplest one on the whole list. He's a big fan of anime and internet culture, and especially of 90s otaku culture. Also, I re-recorded that line like 6 times and I couldn't find a way to emphasize the word otaku without sounding like a total dweeb, so you're just gonna have to put up with it. Wowaka's name wasn't one I could find any etymology for. Whatever it meant to him, he never shared it. However, he did have a rather interesting P name, Genjitsu Tohi P, or Escape from Reality P. When he released his first song, In the Gray Zone with Hatsune Miku, he was still a university student, and one who seems to have gotten pretty slammed during exam season. Thus, he commented in the description for that first big song that sometimes it's nice to have an escape from reality. Though I rarely saw him identified by the P name, with most people sticking just to Wowaka, the themes that he would explore throughout his music career make me think that his early fans definitely chose the nickname well. 40-meter P's name is properly pronounced 40 P by Japanese speakers, but like with Deco, unlearning my Anglophone instincts has been easier said than done. Regardless, the meters in question refer to the units of measurement, not musical meters. He released his earliest songs under the name Pianica P, which seems pretty self-explanatory, he's good at the piano. But commenters noted that in the illustration for his song Melody in the Sky, the way the Miku was silhouetted made her look like she was the same height as the skyscrapers in the background, at least 40 meters tall. Once the idea was out there, 40MP ran with it. You can see Miku looking like a giant in the artwork for Time Machine, as she works on a sprawling scale model of a city with a skyscraper. While in songs like the appropriately titled Gigantic Girl, the idea of physically growing beyond human proportions is used as a metaphor for personal growth, or impossibly huge emotions. In the Project Diva music video for that song, she even gets to fight a Godzilla knockoff. And outside of vocal synth, he's also released music under the name Iname Toru, which is another play on the same theme of height. Iname is 1.7 meters tall, about 5'7", and 1.7 meters can be read as, you guessed it, Ina Metoru. And finally, we wrap things up with Ichirokuyon or Hiroshi, aka 164. Hiroshi is his given name, and the kanji for 1, 6, and 4 can be read with the same pronunciation. In my episode about him, I used Hiroshi throughout because in the tweet where he explained the origins of his name, he invited people to be friendly and just call him Hiroshi. I still often mentally read it as 164 in the same way that I'm still in the habit of calling Deco 27, but so far Hiroshi's been the easiest habit to break. Obviously, for all the big names that I've gone through, this list is just the tip of the iceberg of all the vocal synth producers out there. I'm sure every name has some kind of a story behind it, and I'd love to do another episode like this if I learned some more of these stories. But in the meantime, if you're as interested in Western alternative rock as you are in Vocaloid, I highly recommend you check out the podcast The Ongoing History of New Music, hosted by Alan Cross. It was a big inspiration for the style and format of Happy Synthesizers, and this episode in particular owes a lot to an episode that Cross did about various band names, which I'll link to in the show notes. And until next time, take care, and I hope you learned something interesting. 39 big thank yous for listening, everyone. Please follow the pod if you haven't already, and leave a review if you're feeling generous. It makes a big difference for small pods like this. I have all the transcripts, sources, and social media at linktree/Happy Synthesizers, and I'm working on putting together a Patreon if you're really keen to support the show. It should be ready by the next episode's release, so keep an eye out for the announcements. Happy Synthesizers is written and hosted by Kay Jensen. The theme music is Ia Van Polka, arranged with inspiration from Loy Tuma and Altomania.